Let's bring in White House Press Secretary Stephanie Grisham now. Stephanie, thank you for joining us this morning. We just heard President Trump overnight call this an eternal mark of shame for Democrats. But how concerned is he behind closed doors that impeachment will be an indelible mark on his record?
Thank you for having me. The president has said many times that this isn't something The president has said many times that this isn't something he necessarily wants on his resume. But it's been very clear from the start that this has been a very partisan impeachment, and history is just not going to look kindly on the Democrats led by Nancy Pelosi and Schumer and Nadler. And that's, I think, what the president has been saying. And if you look at the polling numbers, and it's showing that the American people also are seeing what's going on, his polling numbers continue to go up in terms of Americans don't want to see impeachment and they don't support impeachment.
Well, the split down the middle, actually, on impeachment. But moving on to the Senate trial right now, we now know that Speaker Pelosi and the Democrats want witnesses in the Senate trial. And that's an idea that President Trump has endorsed. Let's take a look.
When it's fair, and it will be fair in the Senate, I would love to have Mike Pompeo. I'd love to have Mick. I'd love to have Rick Perry and many other people testify. But I don't want them to testify when this is a total fix. I want them to testify, but I want them to testify in the Senate where they'll get a fair trial.
So will President Trump now ask those witnesses to appear at a Senate trial?
Well, I'm not going to get ahead of the legal strategy that's being looked at right now. And then now, as you guys talked about earlier, Nancy Pelosi, it looks like she may not even send these articles over to the Senate, which is just another gimmick and more changing of the rules. So we'll have to see what happens there. The president, though, will be represented by a very strong team. And as he has said, as I have said, we do hope for and know and are confident that we will get a very fair shake in the trial over there, and again, we'll be able to tell our story, and the American people will be able to see what the president has been saying all along, and that he's done just absolutely nothing wrong.
But is he
the only
concerned
evidence?
now?
If I can just say one more thing, the only evidence that's truly out there are the transcripts that the president he himself released, and again, he did nothing wrong.
Well, actually, 70%, and according to polling, 70% of Americans think he did do something wrong there. And there's a body of testimony showing that the military aid was withheld and a White House meeting was withheld as the president was asking for these political investigations.
Not political investigations. We wanted to look into corruption. That's very important. And I think if the media would cover this fairly, then perhaps people wouldn't think he did anything wrong. He was looking into corruption. He wanted to make sure that the new president of Ukraine was holding up his end of the deal, which is what he ran on, which was no corruption. He wanted to make sure that before taxpayer dollars went to another country, the corruption would be done. You
just used the word corruption several times, a word the president never used in that phone call with the Ukrainian president, but he did mention the Biden several times.
He did say that. He said, do us a favor, meaning the country, and he asked that they look into corruption, which Vice President Biden, at the time, is on videotape, as you all know, talking about until a teleprosecutor in Ukraine got fired, they would withhold money. That in itself is corruption, so that was an example that was being used.
That was not corruption. That was U.S. foreign policy. It was the policy of the World Bank at the time. It was the policy of the European Union. And again, the president didn't use the word corruption in that phone call. But I do want to move on to the president's comments about Congressman Dingell last night. We showed them in the piece, Mary Bruce's piece right there. It's drawing rebukes from many Democrats, but also from Republicans. Cindy McCain has tweeted on it this morning. Fred Upton, one of the senior Republican congressmen from Michigan, has also put up a tweet. I want to show it right there. He says, I've always looked up to John Dingell, my good friend and a great Michigan legend. There was no need to diss him in a crass political way. Most unfortunate, and an apology is due. Will the president apologize to the Dingell family?
I haven't spoken to the president about that. I would say that I am very, very sorry for her loss. And I would thank her and I would thank her late husband for all of the service to our country. The president did lower the flags at the White House to have staff to do everything he could to honor him at her request. So we'll see what happens from there. We do thank them for their service. And again, very, very sorry for her loss.
Why do you think the president said that overnight?
You'd have to talk to the president about that. He was at a political rally. He has been under attack and under an impeachment attack for the last few months, and then just under attack politically for the last 2.5 years. I think that, as we all know, the president is a counterpuncher. It was a very, very supportive and wild crowd, and he was just riffing on some of the things that had been happening the past few days.
Well, as you said, we'll see if he comes forward with an apology later in the day. Final question, and thank you for coming today. This is your first time on Good Morning America.
Thank you for having me.
You've broken with tradition by doing away with the daily White House press briefings for a press secretary. In fact, as far as I can tell, you've never held one. Why is that?
So before I took over, Sarah hadn't done any, my predecessor Sarah hadn't done any either. Ultimately, that will be up to the president if I ever do a press briefing. I'm happy to do them. Right now, my team and I are very accessible in many other ways. We're doing interviews. I've got reporters in my office all the time. To be very honest with you, the press briefings had turned into less about explaining the president's policies and more about arguments and theater. And I don't think that it was serving the American people. I think that when it's a lot of reporters using it to be able to promote themselves and sell books and be very verbose and kind of throw some tantrums, that's not serving the people, and that's not the way that the press briefing room should be used. So hopefully, if the temperature can be taken down and the president decides that a briefing is a good idea, I'll be behind the podium.
Stephanie Grisham, thanks for joining us.